Have you ever had someone leave you, then spend every moment trying to prove they're better off without you? Not because they miss you, no, but because they need you to feel like you lost. Like they won. What if I told you I've been there? That I know exactly what it's like to pick up the pieces of your life after a brutal divorce, only to get photo after photo of your ex's shiny new upgrade. His fiancée's a model, he says. She's stunning, successful, perfect. And of course, he makes sure I see it all. Every smile, every dinner, every trip. But here's the thing. While he was busy showing off, I was busy moving on. Quietly. Powerfully. I married someone who doesn't just drive luxury cars. He builds them. He runs the entire company. Trust me, this isn't just a story about revenge. It's about that exact moment when the man who thought he was the prize realizes he never was. He thought he was. The divorce decree had felt like a period at the end of a long, rambling sentence for Camilla Bennett. It was supposed to signify silence, an end to the constant, low-humming anxiety that had become the soundtrack of her marriage to Ethan. But Ethan had found a way to keep broadcasting, turning the silence she craved into a cacophony of his own alleged success. Their marriage had dissolved not with a bang, but with a slow, corrosive drip of condescension. Ethan, a mid-level finance bro who spoke of synergy and leveraging assets as if he'd invented the concepts, had always seen Camilla's aspirations as a quaint hobby. She was a gifted illustrator. Her sketches were filled with delicate, fierce life that he never truly saw. To him, her art was a nice little pastime, something to keep her busy while he did the important work of climbing the corporate ladder at Morgan Stanley. "It's great, honey," he'd say, glancing at a new piece for half a second before turning his attention back to the flickering stock tickers on his phone. "Maybe you can sell some on Etsy." The final straw had been his affair. It wasn't a passionate, soul-stirring romance. It was a tacky, predictable dalliance with a paralegal from his office, a woman who seemed to find his jargon impressive. When Camilla found out, the ensuing fight wasn't explosive. It was exhausting. Ethan wasn't even truly sorry for the infidelity, only for the inconvenience of being caught. The divorce that followed was acrimonious, not because they fought over assets. They had a modest apartment in Seattle and a shared savings account that Ethan insisted he'd contributed more to. But because Ethan fought over the narrative, he needed to be the one who had left, the one who had moved on to bigger and better things. And that was where Jasmine entered the picture. The first text arrived 3 months after the papers were signed. It was a selfie of Ethan and a blonde woman, their faces pressed together, the generic background of a crowded bar blurred behind them. The caption read, "Finally, with someone who appreciates the grind. Hope you're doing okay." Camilla's heart did a painful little lurch. The woman was undeniably beautiful, with cheekbones that could cut glass and a practiced pout. This was Jasmine. The model. Ethan made sure to use her title as if it were a noble one. Jasmine the model. Camilla, who was currently covered in a fine layer of charcoal dust from a particularly frustrating sketch, wearing her favorite paint-splattered sweats, felt a familiar pang of inadequacy. It was a feeling Ethan had expertly cultivated in her for years. She deleted the text without replying, but the silence didn't deter him. A week later, another text, a professional-looking photo of Jasmine on a beach, modeling a vibrant bikini for some obscure swimwear brand. "Look at her go, booked and busy. So proud of my girl." Then came the Instagram tags. He'd post a picture of their dinner at Canlis, a place Camilla had always wanted to go for her birthday, but that Ethan always deemed frivolous. He tagged Camilla in the corner of the photo, a digital poke in the ribs. He posted about their weekend getaway to Whistler, their shopping sprees at Nordstrom flagship, and Jasmine's grueling casting calls. He was curating a life not for his own enjoyment, but for Camilla's consumption. He was building his new kingdom on the ashes of her self-esteem. Her friends, Lena and Michael, were furious on her behalf. "Just block him," Lena urged over a glass of wine at a cozy little wine bar in Capitol Hill. "What kind of pathetic loser does that? He's so insecure, it's practically leaking out of his pores." "I know, but..." Camilla trailed off, swirling the deep red liquid in her glass. "It feels like if I block him, he wins, like I'm admitting that it gets to me." "But it is getting to you," Michael said gently. He had known Ethan since college and had watched his friend's ego inflate over the years like a parade float. Camila, you don't owe him a window into your life, and you certainly don't have to look through his. His happiness is not your problem anymore. She knew they were right, but a part of her, the part that had spent 7 years trying to be enough for Ethan, still felt the sting. She had supported him through his MBA, proofreading his papers late into the night. She had decorated their apartment, managed their finances, and hosted his work colleagues, always playing the role of the supportive, unassuming wife. She had put her own freelance career on the back burner, taking on bland corporate graphic design work to ensure a steady income while he chased a promotion that was always just around the corner. She had given him the best years of her 20s. And his parting gift was a constant reminder of how easily she had been replaced with a newer, shinier model. Determined to take her friend's advice, Camila made a decision: she wouldn't block him. That felt too reactive. Instead, she would mute him. She would simply tune him out and, more importantly, start tuning back into herself. She quit the soul-crushing corporate design job. It was terrifying. The financial safety net, gone in a single email, but the sense of liberation was intoxicating. She started spending her days at the Seattle Art Museum, losing herself in the quiet grandeur of the European painting wing, sketching the dramatic folds of fabric in a John Singer Sargent portrait, the raw emotion in a Rembrandt. For the first time in years, she felt a flicker of the old passion, the pure, unadulterated joy of creating something beautiful just for the sake of it. To make ends meet, she took a part-time job as a gallery assistant in a small, chic art space in Belltown that specialized in emerging contemporary sculptors. It was there that she met him. His name was Julien Moreau. Camila knew the name. Of course she did. Anyone with even a passing interest in luxury design or automotive innovation knew the name Moreau. His was a brand synonymous with stunning, state-of-the-art luxury vehicles. His cars weren't just transportation. They were moving art, a seamless blend of engineering and aesthetic excellence. Owning a Moreau wasn't just a status symbol, it was an identity. The man himself was an enigma, a notoriously private figure who rarely gave interviews and was almost never photographed. He was said to be in his late 40s, French and utterly brilliant. He walked into the gallery on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. The place was empty, save for Camila, who was carefully adjusting the lighting on a polished metal sculpture. He was tall and lean, dressed in a simple black cashmere sweater, dark trousers, and a pair of impeccably crafted leather shoes. His salt and pepper hair was cut short, and his face looked like it belonged on a Roman coin, strong, sharp, and etched with the fine lines of thought and experience. He moved with a quiet, confident grace that instantly commanded the space without demanding attention. He didn't introduce himself. He simply nodded at Camila. His eyes, a startlingly intense shade of blue, already scanning the art on the walls. He spent nearly an hour in the small gallery, studying each piece with a focused stillness that Camila found fascinating. She stayed behind her desk, pretending to be busy with paperwork, but she was watching him in the periphery. He wasn't just looking. He was seeing. He'd stand before a piece, his head tilted, his gaze tracing the path of every curve, every contrast. Finally, he approached her desk. "This piece," he said, his voice a low, smooth baritone, with a faint, elegant French accent. He gestured toward a sculpture by a young artist from Kyoto, a stunning creation of layered steel arcs coated in a deep indigo finish, woven with interlaced lines of chrome. "The tension in the form is extraordinary," he continued. "It's both chaotic and perfectly controlled." "She understands that what's not there is just as powerful as what is," he said. Camila was taken aback. Most patrons offered a simple, "That's nice," or asked about the price. No one had ever articulated the essence of that particular piece so perfectly. "I agree," Camila replied, finding her voice. "She says she's inspired by the concept of ma, the Japanese principle of negative space." A flicker of a smile touched his lips. "Of course, it's a musical concept as much as an artistic one. The silence between the notes." He looked at her, and for the first time his intense gaze was focused entirely on her. "You're not just a gallery assistant." It wasn't a question, it was a statement of fact. Camila felt a blush creep up her neck. "I'm an artist. An illustrator, mostly." "Show me," he said simply. The request was so direct, so devoid of pretense, that she found herself complying without a second thought. She pulled her sketchbook from her bag beneath the desk. It was a worn, leather-bound book, its pages filled with her museum sketches, charcoal studies of faces, and intricate floral patterns she designed in her spare moments. She hesitated, then opened it to a recent drawing, a detailed sketch of a wilted peony, its petals curling and browning at the edges, yet still retaining a tragic, delicate beauty. It was a study in decay and resilience, a reflection of her own bruised heart. He took the book from her gently, his fingers brushing hers. The touch was brief, but it sent a surprising jolt through her. He studied the drawing with the same focused intensity. He had given the sculpture pieces the same attention. He turned the page, then another and another. He looked at her sketches of sergeant's drapery, her studies of hands, her whimsical designs of birds with impossibly elaborate plumage. Camilla's heart was pounding. She felt more exposed in that moment than she ever had in her life. This man, this stranger, was seeing a part of her that not even Ethan had ever bothered to look at. After what felt like an eternity, he closed the book and handed it back to her. His blue eyes were unreadable. "You have a remarkable eye," he said, his tone serious, measured. "You see the architecture of things, the way a petal falls, the line of a collarbone, the weight of a fabric. It's a rare gift." He reached into the pocket of his coat, produced a simple, heavy, cream-colored business card, and laid it on the desk. It contained only a name, Julien Moreau, and a phone number. No title, no company. It didn't need one. "I'm currently seeking new collaborators for a special initiative at my design lab," he said. "Automotive interiors, textiles, finishes, detail work. Your illustrations, I believe they could translate beautifully into our materials design. Call this number. My assistant will arrange a meeting." And with that, he gave her another small, polite nod and walked out of the gallery, the little bell above the door chiming softly in his wake. Camilla stared at the card, her fingers trembling slightly as she picked it up. The cardstock was thick, luxurious. Julien Moreau. She sank into her chair, her mind reeling. One of the most visionary luxury car innovators in the world had just seen her work. He had seen her. That evening, as she was getting ready for bed, her phone buzzed. It was another text from Ethan. A picture of Jasmine's hand, a ridiculously large cushion-cut diamond sitting on her ring finger. She said yes. "Time to make it official. Can't wait for you to meet the future Mrs. Green. No hard feelings, right?" A few months ago, a text like that would have sent her into a spiral of tears and Ben & Jerry's. But tonight, as Camilla looked at the photo of the ostentatious ring, a symbol of Ethan's shallow victory, she felt nothing. She placed her phone face down on the nightstand. On the other side of the stand, gleaming softly in the lamplight, was Julien Moreau's business card. Ethan was busy showing off a diamond. Camilla, however, had just been handed a key to a world she'd only ever dreamed of. A world where her art wasn't a hobby, but a gift. A world where she might finally be seen. A slow, genuine smile spread across her face. The game had changed, and Ethan didn't even know he was playing. The phone call was the most nerve-wracking 3 minutes of Camilla's life. She dialed the number on the card, and a crisp, professional voice answered immediately. "Mr. Moreau's office." Camilla, stumbling slightly over her words, explained who she was and the reason for her call. Without missing a beat, the assistant scheduled a meeting for the following Friday at the Moreau Design Group headquarters in South Lake Union. That entire week, Camilla alternated between exhilaration and dread. She kept the appointment in her calendar, but more than once hovered her finger over the delete button. Friday morning arrived with a chill in the air and a tightness in her chest. As she stood across the street from the building, she hesitated, her heels rooted to the sidewalk. Her reflection in the sleek black glass facade stared back at her, a woman still dressed in a thrifted coat with charcoal under her nails. What was she doing here? This wasn't her world. This was the world of polished boardrooms and multi-million-dollar ideas. She almost turned back. Almost. But then she remembered the way Julien had looked at her sketch, the wilted peony, and how, for the first time in years, someone had seen more than just a hobby. He had seen something worth cultivating. That memory was enough. She crossed the street. The building itself was a masterpiece of understated power. It was a former industrial steelworks, its facade painted a deep matte graphite gray, with no signage, just a small, elegant brass plate beside the door that read simply, Moreau. Inside, the space was cavernous, a stunning juxtaposition of raw industrial bones, exposed steel beams, polished concrete floors, and a minimalist, gallery-like polish. There were no car prototypes lying around, no glossy advertisements. The only art on the walls were massive, abstract panels in slate and ivory. The air itself seemed to hum with a quiet, focused energy. Camila was led to Julian's private office. It was on the top floor, a light-filled sanctuary with a floor-to-ceiling window that offered a breathtaking panorama of the Seattle skyline. One wall was lined with bookshelves filled with volumes on design, architecture, and history. A single massive walnut table served as his desk, its surface nearly bare, save for a sleek laptop and a single perfect white orchid in a clear glass vase. Julian rose as she entered. He was dressed much the same as before, in a perfectly tailored navy blue shirt and gray trousers. But in his own environment, he looked even more formidable. "Camila, thank you for coming," he said, gesturing to a chair opposite his desk. His smile was small but genuine. "Thank you for inviting me," she managed, her voice steadier than she expected. He wasted no time on small talk. "I've been thinking about your drawings," he began, leaning forward slightly, "specifically your floral illustrations, the peony, the wilted one." Camila's brow furrowed in surprise. "The wilted one?" "Yes, there's a truth in it. Beauty isn't about perfection, it's about character, about story. A perfect bloom is lovely, but one that has lived, faced the sun and rain, begun to fade." "That's interesting," she murmured. He paused, his blue eyes locking onto hers. "I'm launching a new design concept for our next interior line. It's called ephemeral, and it's about the fleeting, transient beauty of life. I want to create a signature texture series that captures that essence. I want you to design them." Camila was speechless. Her designs for Julien Moreau's interiors? The idea was so audacious. It was so far beyond the realm of anything she had ever imagined that she almost laughed. Ethan's taunts about selling her doodles on Etsy echoed in her mind, a pathetic, tiny sound in this cathedral of automotive luxury. I've never designed for materials before," she admitted. "I'm not hiring you for your experience," Julien said calmly. "I'm hiring you for your eye. I have a team of the best materials engineers and interior technicians in the world. They will handle the technical execution. What I need from you is your vision, your soul. I want you to draw, Camila. Draw the beauty in the imperfect, the life cycle of a flower, from the tight bud to the final fallen petal. Draw the patterns of frost on a window pane, the veins in a leaf. That is what I want." And so her new life began. Julien gave her a studio space within the Moreau Design Center, a bright, airy room with a drafting table, every kind of paper, pen, and ink she could ever desire, and the same stunning view as his own office. For the first few weeks, she was paralyzed by a crippling sense of imposter syndrome. She was Camila Bennett from Seattle, the ex-wife of a finance bro. What was she doing here, in the inner sanctum of a luxury auto visionary? Julien seemed to sense her hesitation. He never pressured her. He would simply stop by her studio at the end of each day. Sometimes he would say nothing, just stand behind her and watch her work. Other times he would talk to her, not about the project, but about art, about music, about a film he had seen. He learned about her divorce from Ethan, not because she complained, but because he was a perceptive listener, and he gently drew the story out of her in fragments. He never pried. Instead, he expressed a quiet, steely anger on her behalf. "He tried to make you small," Julien said one evening, looking at one of her early hesitant sketches, "because he is a small man. Men like that, they don't build their own light. They try to extinguish yours so they can feel warmer in the dark." His words were a balm on a wound she hadn't realized was still so raw. With him, she felt not just seen, but understood. The fear began to recede, replaced by a thrilling, burgeoning confidence. Her illustrations came to life. She filled pages with the delicate skeletons of decaying leaves, the explosive patterns of dandelions gone to seed, and of course, her signature wilted peonies. She poured all the pain, the resilience, and the fragile hope of the past year onto the paper. Julien was a brilliant collaborator. He would look at a sketch and say, "What if the ink bled a little more here?" to suggest a tear. or morning dew. He pushed her, challenged her, and celebrated her breakthroughs. A professional intimacy grew between them, a deep and abiding respect that soon blossomed into something more. It happened one late night in her studio. They were reviewing a series of charcoal drawings she'd done of frost patterns. Rain lashed against the huge windows, the city lights below blurring into a watercolor painting. They stood side by side, their shoulders almost touching as they looked down at the drawings. "They're beautiful, Camila," he said, his voice soft. "They're cold, but they're full of life." She looked up at him and found he was already looking at her. The space between them crackled with an energy that had nothing to do with art. It was something older, more elemental. He slowly raised a hand and gently brushed a stray strand of hair from her cheek. His touch lingered, warm and sure. "You," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "are full of life." And then he leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't a kiss of wild, desperate passion. It was a kiss of arrival. It was quiet and deep and felt like coming home. Their romance was a secret, a beautiful world they built for themselves, away from the prying eyes of the industry. They spent their evenings in his minimalist, art-filled apartment overlooking Lake Washington, cooking together, talking for hours, or simply sitting in comfortable silence, reading. He showed her a side of the city she had never known, private viewings at the Seattle Art Museum, after-hours reservations at impossible-to-book restaurants like Canlis, where the chef came out personally to greet Julian. Yet despite the glamour, their connection was rooted in simplicity. Her favorite moments were the quiet ones, watching him sketch in his own notebook, his brow furrowed in concentration, or waking up next to him in the morning, the city quiet below them, feeling a sense of peace she never thought possible. Meanwhile, Ethan's campaign of petty torture continued, blissfully unaware of the tectonic shift in Camila's universe. He had escalated his efforts, announcing his engagement to Jasmine on Facebook with a professionally shot photo album titled The Next Chapter. He sent Camila a direct invitation to their engagement party, a lavish affair to be held at a trendy rooftop bar in Belltown. The message attached read, "No hard feelings. Would be great to see you and show you that we can all be mature about this. Tiff is so excited to finally meet you." The old Camila would have agonized over the invitation. The new Camila simply laughed. She was living and breathing design, creating beauty with a man who cherished her mind and her talent. She was in love, a deep, profound love that made her past life with Ethan seem like a black and white film. His desperate need for validation was, for the first time, genuinely pathetic to her. She declined the invitation with a polite, brief email. 3 months after their first kiss, Julien took Camila to Paris. He said it was for work, to oversee material production at his design atelier. But it was clearly a thinly veiled romantic getaway. They stayed in his private apartment on the Place des Vosges, a breathtaking space with herringbone floors and ornate moldings. One evening, after a simple dinner of bread, cheese, and wine at a small bistro, they were walking along the Seine. The lights of the Eiffel Tower glittered in the distance. Julien stopped and turned to her. He didn't get down on one knee. He didn't produce a velvet box. His proposal was as direct, honest, and beautiful as the man himself. "Camila Bennett," he said, taking both of her hands in his, "I have spent my life in pursuit of beauty. I found it in art, in music, in the curve of a concept car's body, but I have never known a beauty as true or as profound as the one I've found with you. I love you. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you be my wife?" Tears streamed down her face as she said yes. They were married 2 weeks later, not in a grand cathedral, but in the small, sun-dappled garden of his countryside estate in Provence. The only guests were Julien's elderly housekeeper, who wept openly, and the local mayor, who officiated. Camila wore a simple, elegant ivory dress that Julien had designed for her himself. It wasn't a gown. It was a whisper of silk that moved like water. She didn't have a diamond ring. Instead, Julien had designed 2 bands for them, simple, heavy bands of platinum, their inner surfaces engraved with the coordinates of the spot on the Seine where he had proposed. It was private, perfect, and entirely theirs. They decided to keep the marriage a secret for a while longer. Julien's upcoming collection, the Ephemer series, featuring Camilla's patterns, was due to be unveiled at the annual Moreau Foundation Gala in New York in 2 months. It was the biggest event on the city's social and design calendar, a night where titans of industry, art, and media converged. "This collection is a tribute to you," Julian had told her. "It feels right that we share our news with the world on the night we share our work." Back in New York, life continued. Camilla worked tirelessly to finalize the designs, her heart full and her creativity boundless, and Ethan, oblivious, was preparing for his own big moment, his wedding to Jasmine, scheduled a week before the Moreau Gala. He sent Camilla one final, triumphant text. It was a link to a small feature on Jasmine in a local bridal blog. The headline was cringeworthy: "Model Bride, Jasmine Carter on snagging her finance king." The message below was from Ethan. "Just in case you wanted to see what real happiness looks like, wedding's next week. Don't worry, you're not invited." Camilla looked at the text, then deleted it. She walked into her studio, where the first finished bolts of fabric had just arrived from the Italian mill. She ran her hand over the silk shantung, her wilted peony design rendered in stunning, subtle shades of blush and charcoal. It was more beautiful than she had ever imagined. Ethan thought he was marrying a model. He had no idea. His ex-wife was about to be revealed as the muse and partner of a king of luxury design. The gala was in 1 week. The curtain was about to rise. The night of the Moreau Foundation Gala arrived like a city holding its breath. The event was being held at the Museum of Contemporary Art, which had been transformed into an ethereal forest inspired by the Ephemer collection. Twisting branches laden with flickering fairy lights arched over the entrance, and the air was scented with damp earth and night-blooming jasmine. The guest list was a tightly curated selection of the world's most influential figures. You couldn't buy a ticket. You had to be personally invited by Julien Moreau himself, which is why the presence of Ethan Green and his new bride Jasmine was something of an anomaly. Ethan had pulled every string he had: an executive director at J.P. Morgan, a man who sat on the museum's advisory board, owed him a favor. Ethan cashed it in, pleading that it was a post-honeymoon treat for his wife Jasmine, who was passionate about couture design. The director, with a weary sigh, arranged 2 tickets for Ethan. But this wasn't about celebrating innovation or beauty. It was the ultimate social conquest. Being seen at the Moreau Gala was confirmation of his arrival, a final, glittering trophy to hang on his wall. He and Jasmine made a grand entrance. Ethan was straining in a Tom Ford tuxedo that was just a little too tight in the shoulders. Jasmine was poured into a garish, bright red gown by a designer known more for shock value than elegance. The dress was loud, aggressively sexy, and utterly wrong for the sophisticated atmosphere of the evening. They posed for photographers on the steps, Ethan grinning like he'd won the lottery, Jasmine striking a series of practiced, vacant model poses. Inside they mingled, or rather, Ethan mingled, while Jasmine clung to his arm, looking vaguely overwhelmed. Ethan navigated the crowded room with the unearned confidence of a man who believed he belonged everywhere. He clapped men he barely knew on the back, introduced Jasmine loudly to anyone who would listen. "This is my wife, Jasmine. Yes, the model." And generally made a spectacle of himself. "Julien Moreau is a genius," he declared to a small group while sipping his champagne. "Absolute genius. His understanding of market disruption is unparalleled. I've been following his brand's valuation for years." He had no idea. Camilla arrived with Julien through a private entrance. She was a vision of understated elegance. She wore one of Julien's creations, but it wasn't from the new collection. It was a column gown in the deepest midnight blue, silk velvet so dark it was almost black. It had long sleeves, a high neckline, and a daringly low back. It wasn't a dress that shouted, it mesmerized. Her hair was swept up in a simple, elegant chignon, and her only jewelry was a pair of sapphire and diamond earrings, Julien's wedding gift, chosen to mirror the color of his eyes. She was nervous, her hand clutching his, but Julien just squeezed it gently. "They are here to celebrate our work, mon amour," he whispered, his voice a calming presence in the sea of noise. "Our work and our love. There is nothing to fear." They stayed in a private reception area for the first hour, greeting close friends and major donors. People like the editor-in-chief of Moda Journal, who greeted Julien with a warm embrace and eyed Camila with a look of intense, discerning approval. And the CEO of the Oron Group, one of Moreau's major investors. Camila, to her own surprise, felt perfectly at ease. These people weren't interested in gossip or pretense. They were talking about art, about business, about the changing world, and it was a conversation she realized she belonged in. Finally, it was time for the main event, the unveiling of the collection and Julien's speech. He and Camila made their way to the front of the grand atrium, where a stage had been set up. As they walked, a hush fell over the room. All eyes turned to Julien Moreau and to the mysterious, elegant woman by his side. From across the room, Ethan saw them. His eyes widened, and he nudged Jasmine. "Hey, isn't that Camila?" He squinted. "What the hell is she doing here? And who's that guy she's with?" Jasmine peered across the room. "I don't know. He looks old," she said dismissively. "Maybe she's a waitress? The uniform's nice." Ethan snorted. "A waitress at the Moreau Gala? Don't be stupid." He rolled his eyes. "She probably scammed a ticket off some rich old guy. Good for her, I guess. At least she's aiming high." He felt a smug sense of satisfaction. Even here, at the pinnacle of society, Camila was still a plus one. A hanger-on. He, Ethan Green, was here on his own merit. On stage, Julien stepped up to the podium. The room was silent, save for the clicking of cameras. "Good evening," he began, his voice resonating through the space. "Thank you all for being here to support the work of the Moreau Foundation, which this year will be funding arts education in underserved public schools here in New York," Julien continued. He spoke for a few minutes about the importance of creativity, how it shapes young minds, unlocks possibility. He was a captivating speaker, passionate, articulate. Ethan found himself grudgingly impressed. "Tonight," Julien said, his eyes scanning the crowd, "we are unveiling a collection that is deeply personal to me. It is called Ephemer. It is a meditation on the fragile, fleeting, and profound beauty of life. But this collection is not solely my own creation. It is a collaboration. It is the result of a partnership with an artist of singular vision and extraordinary talent. An artist whose unique perspective on the world has not only inspired this collection, but has fundamentally changed my own." A wave of murmurs swept through the audience. Julien Moreau had never collaborated so closely with an unknown artist before. From his vantage point, Ethan smirked. Some lucky artist was about to have their career made. He wondered if he could get an introduction. Might be a great networking opportunity. Julien smiled, a slow, warm smile that seemed to light up the stage. He turned and held out his hand to Camila. "It is my great honor," he said, his voice full of pride and unmistakable love, "to introduce you to the soul of this collection." Camila took his hand and stepped forward into the spotlight, and Julien added, his voice ringing with joyous clarity as he raised their joined hands, "The soul of my life, my wife, Camila Moreau." The name hit the room like a thunderclap. Camila Moreau. There was a collective gasp. 1,000 phones were suddenly raised, their flashes creating a supernova of light. On the giant screens flanking the stage, Camila's face was projected, serene, smiling, her hand held firmly in Julien's. The simple, elegant platinum band on her finger caught the light, visible to every corner of the room. Ethan Green froze. The champagne glass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the marble floor, but he didn't notice. His face went chalk white. The blood drained from his head, and the roar of the crowd faded into a high-pitched ringing in his ears. Camila Moreau. His Camila? No, it wasn't possible. It had to be a joke, a mistake. But then the show began. Models emerged onto the runway, clad in breathtaking designs from the Ephemer collection. And on the flowing silks, the structured layers, the ethereal organzas were Camila's drawings, her wilted peony, rendered in exquisite threadwork and embroidery, her frost patterns beaded into glittering masterpieces, the delicate skeletons of her leaves printed onto chiffon that floated like smoke. On the screens behind the runway, Camila's original sketches were projected, fading in and out, seamlessly blending with the finished garments. It was a triumphant, stunning fusion of art and design. The world was giving a standing ovation to the doodles of the woman Ethan had scorned. He felt dizzy. He looked at Jasmine. Her jaw was slack, her eyes wide with disbelief. The garish red of her dress suddenly seemed cheap and desperate. She looked from the elegant designs flowing down the runway to the woman on stage, the woman being hailed as a genius. The woman married to the man whose name was a global benchmark of power, artistry, and prestige. Then she looked at Ethan, at his ashen face, at the shards of crystal at his feet, and a look of cold, hard calculation crept into her eyes. The show ended, and the applause was deafening. Julien, his arm wrapped securely around Camilla's waist, led her off the stage. They were immediately swarmed by well-wishers, by media giants, by iconic creatives. Ethan stood rooted to the spot, a statue of humiliation in the middle of a glittering crowd. People had started to whisper, to stare. He had bragged to so many of them about his model wife. The irony was brutally thick. He had been playing checkers. Camilla? She'd mastered three-dimensional chess. He had to get to her. He had to understand. Ethan began pushing through the crowd, dragging a reluctant Jasmine behind him. He finally broke through the inner circle, just as the editor-in-chief of Moda was kissing Camilla on both cheeks. Camilla. Ethan's voice cracked. She turned. Her expression was calm, neutral. She looked at him as if he were a vaguely familiar stranger. Ethan, she said. Her tone was even. What a surprise to see you here. What? How? He stammered, gesturing wildly around the room. Moreau? You married? Julien Moreau? Julien, who had been deep in conversation with an art curator, turned his body slightly, placing himself protectively between Ethan and Camilla. His blue eyes, so warm just moments before, turned glacial. He looked Ethan up and down, a slow, dismissive sweep that took in the two tight tucks, the sweat-beaded forehead. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The look alone stripped Ethan of every last shred of his inflated self-importance. This is my wife, Julien said, his voice low and unmistakably dangerous. And you are the man who thought her art belonged on Etsy. It wasn't a question. It was a final judgment. Ethan flinched visibly as if struck. He opened his mouth to apologize, to rage, to plead. He didn't even know. But no words came out. It was Jasmine who spoke. She yanked her arm out of Ethan's grasp. You told me she was a nobody, she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. You told me she was some pathetic artsy loser who couldn't get over you. You've been bragging about me, parading me like some prize, while your ex-wife was marrying him. She gestured toward Julien, her face twisted in fury and humiliation. Then she turned and fled, pushing through the crowd, her dress a red blur of anger and shame. Ethan made a move to follow, then stopped. He turned back to Camilla, a desperate, pleading look on his face. Camilla, I didn't know, he whispered. Camilla looked at him, and for the first time she felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, not even pity. Just nothing. He was a ghost from another life, a life she had long since outgrown. That's just it, Ethan, she said, her voice soft but unwavering. You never knew. You never even tried. She turned her back on him, her hand finding Julien's arm, and together they walked away. Swallowed by a crowd of people who saw her, who celebrated her, who knew her worth. Ethan Green was left standing alone, in the middle of the most exclusive party in New York, a laughingstock in a rented tuxedo, his entire world dismantled in the space of a 10-minute speech. The echo of the shattering glass was the only sound he could still hear. The fallout from the gala was immediate and spectacular. By morning, Camilla Moreau was the top trending topic across every major platform. Moda Journal had an exclusive feature live by 10 a.m., complete with stunning photos from the gala. The headline, The Muse and the Machine, inside the secret wedding of Julien and Camilla Moreau. The story of the brilliant unknown artist who had captured the heart of the enigmatic auto design tycoon was a modern-day fairy tale. And the world was captivated. Camilla's wilted peony became an iconic image overnight. The ephemera collection sold out on pre-order within hours. Ethan's humiliation, by contrast, was quieter, but no less devastating. He woke up in his sterile new money apartment to find Jasmine's closets empty. She was gone. She had left her engagement ring, the one he had bragged about so endlessly, right on his pillow. Next to it, written in red lipstick across his bathroom mirror, was a single word, loser. His phone buzzed incessantly. Messages from friends, co-workers, and distant acquaintances flooded in, ranging from confusion to thinly veiled mockery. The schadenfreude was palpable. The man who had built his entire persona around being a winner had been publicly, spectacularly revealed as a fool. But the final blow came on Monday morning. He was called into the office of the senior managing director, the very man who had pulled strings to get him into the gala. A stern, old money figure named Mr. Abernathy. Abernathy didn't offer him a seat. "Green," he said, voice clipped. "I've just come from a board meeting with our partners at the Stellara Automotive Group." Ethan's stomach dropped. Stellara, parent company of over a dozen luxury automobile brands. For the past 6 months, we've been working to secure the North American financing portfolio for their new EV division. Abernathy's voice grew quieter, colder. "It seems the chairman of the board at Stellara, Mr. Laurent Belmont, is a very close, personal friend of Julien Moreau." He paused, letting the name land. "And Mr. Moreau shared with him a rather unflattering account of one of our vice president's behavior at the gala this weekend. He mentioned arrogance, a public scene, and a deep, public disrespect shown to his new wife." Ethan's insides turned to ice. "The deal is dead, Green," Abernathy said flatly. "Stellara is taking their portfolio to Morgan Stanley." This was a 9-figure deal. He leaned forward, each word striking like a hammer. "Your little ego trip, your need to impress your ex-wife has cost this bank a fortune. Clear out your desk. You're finished." And just like that, Ethan Green, stripped of his job, his fiancée, and his precious image, collapsed. He was a hollow man. The scaffolding of his ego kicked out from under him, revealing a hollow, trembling emptiness. He had spent so long curating an image that he had nothing left inside. Camilla, on the other hand, was blooming. Life as Mrs. Moreau was in many ways unchanged. She and Julien still spent quiet evenings sketching, cooking, listening to jazz. They shared art, they shared peace. Their love was deep, enduring. Unshaken by fame or spotlight, the attention, the glamour, the press, it was just noise. In the background of the beautiful life they were building, the truest transformation was happening in her work. Julien, true to his word, hadn't just put Camilla's name on the collection. He had made her a partner. He created a new division under the Moreau Motors umbrella. Moreau Studio, Textiles by Camilla Moreau. She was given her own creative team, her own budget, and complete artistic freedom. Her once dismissed sketches were now the foundation of a multi-million-dollar design and branding branch of a global automotive empire. And she loved the work. She loved collaborating with textile innovators in Italy, specialty glass finishers in Germany, and cutting-edge interior designers in Sweden. She traveled the world with Julien, drawing inspiration not just from galleries, but from the texture of oxidized stone in Lisbon, the color palette of a spice market in Marrakesh, the shape of a thundercloud above the Scottish Highlands. She was no longer just an artist. She was a creator, a leader, a visionary. About a year after the gala, Camilla was walking through Soho on her way to the Moreau NYC headquarters. She was dressed simply, jeans, a crisp white tee, and a perfectly cut black blazer from her own line. She paused at the window of a high-end concept boutique and stared. Inside, a silk scarf featuring her frost-pattern design was artfully draped around a mannequin's neck. The sight stopped her cold. It was surreal, her work living its own life in the world. As she smiled to herself, a voice behind her called her name. She turned. It was Ethan. She almost didn't recognize him. The slicked-back hair was gone, replaced by a messy, unkempt cut. His designer suit was nowhere to be found, instead, worn-out jeans and a faded polo. In his arms, a cardboard box filled with what looked like office supplies. "Ethan," she said, her voice calm, neutral. There was no bitterness left, no malice. I just wanted to say," he stumbled, adjusting the box awkwardly. "I saw your new collection online, the one inspired by Japanese ceramics. It's beautiful. You're really talented." It was the first time he had ever complimented her art, honestly and unprompted. "Thank you, Ethan," she said simply. "I'm sorry," he blurted. The words came in a flood. "For everything, for how I treated you, for not seeing you, for being such an idiot." "I get it now," Ethan said quietly. "I lost everything, and I realized none of it was real. The job, the girl, the bragging, it was all just noise. You have something real." Camilla looked at the man in front of her. A man not broken by her success, but by his own deep insecurity. She saw a flicker of the man she had once loved before his ego swallowed him whole. "I hope you find something real for yourself, Ethan," she said softly. It was the truest gift she could offer. She wasn't saying it for him. She was saying it for herself. Forgiveness was the final step in her freedom. She gave him a small nod. Then she turned and walked away. She didn't look back. She walked toward the beautiful slate-gray building where her studio, her work, and her husband were waiting. She wasn't Camila Reyes, the scorned ex-wife. She wasn't even Camila Moreau, the billionaire CEO's bride. She was Camila, an artist, a creator, a woman who had finally learned self-worth isn't something given by a man, a job, or a title. It's something you design yourself, woven from the threads of your own strength, your own talent, your own soul. And her design was finally complete. And that's the story of Camila and the ex who bragged a little too much. It's a reminder that the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's building a life so full, so beautiful, that the past simply fades into irrelevance. Camila's journey wasn't about marrying a CEO. It was about rediscovering the priceless value her ex was too blind to see. While he was busy flaunting a cheap imitation of success, she was quietly creating an authentic masterpiece of a life. What did you think of Ethan's ultimate downfall? Was it karma, or just the natural consequence of a life built on ego and illusion? So, that's it. That's the story of Camila, the woman who was once made to feel small, who quietly rebuilt a life so rich and beautiful, even her ex couldn't recognize it. And if you're still here with me now, listening to this moment, I want you to ask yourself something. What would happen if you stopped waiting for someone else to validate your worth? What if you just took the first step, no matter how small, toward building a life that feels like yours? Camila didn't set out to win. She didn't chase revenge or recognition. She chose healing. She chose herself. And that's what made her powerful. There's a quote by Marcus Aurelius that says, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." And that's exactly what Camila did. She didn't fight back with bitterness. She didn't try to match ego with ego. She simply rose, quietly, steadily, into the woman she was always meant to be. So maybe today you're not designing for a luxury brand or living in a Paris apartment, but maybe you're reclaiming your voice. Maybe you're finding joy in something small. Maybe you're letting go of what was never yours to carry, and maybe that's enough. Maybe that's everything. If Camila's journey touched something inside you, some quiet part that's still healing, still hoping, then I want to thank you for being here, really, because that means this story mattered. So go ahead, share this with someone who needs it, and subscribe if you want more stories that don't just entertain, but remind you what's possible. You are not too late. You are not too far gone. You are still becoming, and I'll be right here, week after week, to remind you of that. See you in the next one.